On August 8th, 2014, we got the first Five Nights at Freddy's game. A lot of YouTubers instantly started playing the game within a few months of its release, and it gained popularity pretty fast. And the game had simple enough mechanics where anyone could get into it, but not everyone could beat it. It was a very simplistic game where you just sat in a single room, checking cameras to make sure that the animatronics weren't getting too close to you. Your main goal was to make it till 6 AM without getting spooked, and the nights got progressively harder. However, the first game didn't really give it all away, and I'm not even sure that the creator Scott Cawthon knew exactly what he wanted to do with the series yet. But all we knew is that kids went missing and were probably stuffed in the suits. We knew somebody did it, but we didn't exactly know who. This game instantly became a cult classic, and 4 months later led to the sequel, Fnaf 2. Now the difference between these two games was that Fnaf 2 was much harder. With 6 new animatronics, technically 11 if you're counting the Withered as new, but I think those ones are just the same as the old ones. It had a lot more differentiation in what you had to do to keep yourself safe at night. All of a sudden there was no more doors that you could close to keep the animatronics out. You had a flashlight and a mask as your deterrent, and with more animatronics meant more opportunities to get spooked. But what the second game really brought to the table was a huge chunk of lore. This was the introduction of Purple Guy, and this is how we found out what Purple Guy did. However, this was also the era where we thought the phone guy was the Purple Guy, so we weren't exactly as advanced as we are today with our theories. And since the lore of the second game wasn't nearly enough, Fnaf 3 was added to the table. Now this had the community divided whether it was a good game or not. Some people really enjoyed the mechanics of the third game, where there was only one animatronic who could do you harm, right? But a lot of people didn't like the idea of restarting systems and playing audio. It got a little too technical for a lot of people, so that was a major turnoff. But just like 2, number 3 had a whole lot of lore. We started to learn more about Purple Guy and what happened to him after the incident. He tried to climb into a suit and, well, let's just say, it didn't go his way. But there was still some explaining to do, and that's where number 4 comes in. Kind of. This was a whole different experience for the first time in FNAF history, where we weren't in a Five Nights at Freddy's pizzeria. Instead, we played as a child who was horrified of the animatronics. These animatronics were now nightmares. Granted, there was less of a challenge because there was only 4 animatronics at this point, until you got to nights 5 through 7. However, at the end of every night in this game, we got a huge chunk of lore to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The community was really stirring at this point, and no one really knew what the story was trying to tell. It sounded like it was supposed to be a dream theory, like none of this really happened, but I think the creator of the game realized that that would be a huge cop-out to the game, so that was quickly scrapped. FNAF 5 was supposed to be the game that tied up all the loose ends in the story, even though FNAF 4 was supposed to be the end. FNAF 5 was another huge change to the game. Although we were back in a Five Nights at Freddy's pizzeria, or storage facility as it's known now, but in this game, it was no longer really standing in one place. There was many places you had to go to complete the game. There was Baby's area, Funtime Freddy's area, Ballora's, Foxy, you get the deal, right? Every night was different. It wasn't wash, rinse, and repeat. It really was a whole different game. That being said, this was one of the games that you either loved it or you hated it. Personally, I liked the game because the new mechanics made the game fresh again. It wasn't just sitting in a room, checking cameras, closing doors. It really had that kind of explorative nature that I wanted in a FNAF game. Unfortunately though, FNAF 5 left more questions unanswered than answered, so that's where FNAF 6 comes in, Pizzeria Simulator. I'd say personally that this game was jam-packed with the most lore. There was a lot that we learned in this game. We found out Afton's intentions and put an end to his story, as well as Henry, Baby, the puppet, and everyone else that this series had been circulating around for years. It basically ended with all the previous characters we'd known and loved getting trapped in a burning building while the curtains close. But then FNAF Custom Night came out, and this threw a wrench in the whole thing a little bit because the story was done, the story was wrapped up, there wasn't much else to do. So why all of a sudden is there an Ultimate Custom Night where you can choose which animatronics are coming in and which animatronics aren't? It just didn't make a lot of sense. Until we did a little bit of digging and found out that this was supposed to be Afton's nightmare. One of the children that he decided to do dirty ended up coming back and tormenting his soul for the rest of eternity. Once we figured that out, it kind of made sense in the story, but for me it was just something that didn't really necessarily need to be added. The story had wrapped up. And a little bit later, they came out with a game called Fnaf VR. This game was basically a remake of the first 4 games, but instead, it was a first-person experience. It added some more side content too, but there wasn't too much lore to dig in this game. There were tapes that you could collect to piece together a story of the Glitch Bunny or whatnot, but at the end of the day, this didn't really add to the grand scheme of things that much. It was just kind of another little side quest that we were now trying to figure out. After that came Security Breach. Now, Security Breach was supposed to represent the after effects of Afton and what he had done. At this point, he was supposed to have been burned, but he does come back at the end for some reason, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. I felt the series was perfectly wrapped up at this point, and there wasn't much else that we really needed to add at all, but apparently Scott wanted a little bit more money out of it, and It makes sense. If you come up with something super successful, you gotta milk it till it's dry. I understand. But the cool thing about FNAF Security Breach was that this was a true 3D game. It was no longer JPEG games, it was no longer quick cuts and easy game construction. No, this was a fully modeled out map with objectives, missions, and the sword. This is where FNAF really started to get good in the gameplay aspect. So good, in fact, that it had a sequel. Now, this sequel was technically not a standalone sequel, it was DLC added to the first game, but still, it was good enough to have its own title and storyline. Now, the setting of Ruin was basically FNAF Pizzeria Simulator after an earthquake hit, leaving the pizzeria pretty devastated and damaged and making the game have a much more horrifying atmosphere. It improved on some game mechanics and wasn't nearly as glitchy as Security Breach in my opinion, and even though it was DLC, it really did deliver on the whole new storyline that the fans were looking for from this. If you've reached this point in the video and you're a true FNAF fan, you might have realized that I forgot one game, and I didn't really forget it, I just didn't really want to bring it up, but I'll go over it briefly. FNAF World was introduced in between Five Nights at Freddy's 4 and 5. It told a whole different story though. I don't even think it had anything to do with the main storyline. It was just an RPG based Five Nights at Freddy's game. A lot of people did not like this game, however, because it was so different from what we were used to. Personally, I enjoyed it, but at the same time, I can see how a lot of people would be disappointed by it. There was no jump scares, there was no spooky parts to the game, it was just a classic RPG. However, a lot of people will say that it has no relevance to the story and it's not brought up ever anymore. It's free to download if you want to play it, but it doesn't really hold significance to the main story, so if you're looking to solve anything, I would never use FNAF World as a guide to help. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment. I love hearing what you guys have to say, and I'll see you in the next one.